certainly gives me a pleasure to be here in worship this morning to, first of all, acknowledge our prison ministry team. And I just want to thank the Lord for the team. We have an awesome team. We enjoy traveling together, meeting together, and just doing the work of the Lord through the act of going to the prisons. I don't want to take a lot of time because I don't want to take any time from Pastor Judy. And, but we're just so grateful to you, the congregation, for coming up and supporting us this morning. We just want to bless God and serve God in this part of His vineyard. And at this time, I would just like the members of our team just to stand so everybody can get to see them and know who they are. Thank you for your service. And a few years back, we started, under the leadership of Sister Joyce, we started making presentations to some of our senior members who have been faithful to the task. And this past couple of years, we've had one of our members, Sister Peggy Florence Carter, who is with us, as she said in her prayer. She's been with us, but she's been away due to health reasons. And even when she wasn't there, she was there. And we really appreciate Sister Peggy's commitment to our prison ministry team. And it's so fitting for us at this time to recognize her as an honorary member of our prison team. And we assured Sister Peggy that this does not mean we're retiring her. This just means that she has the flexibility that if she doesn't want to come, or if she doesn't feel like coming, she doesn't have to feel any pressure that she can't come, but she can walk in and out of our team whenever she feels the need to. And we just love Sister Peggy, and I think the whole community loves Sister Peggy, because she's such a sweet, sweet soul. And it gives me an honor in my tenure to present to her this honorary certificate for the prison ministry of East Preston Baptist Church. And it reads, Certificate of Honorary Membership. This is to certify that Florence Carter is deemed an honorary member of the East Preston United Baptist Church prison ministry team. Well done, faithful servant. And it's signed by the pastor, myself, and Brother Ernie as coach.
You have no idea how happy I am to be here today. I am so excited to be here. I love our volunteers. And Mark, every time I see Mark, do you know what I feel? Feel a little song coming on. Our women were so disappointed that you weren't here last time, but you got to sing that today. 43 years ago, I spent about 2 months in Partridge River School, filling in as a teacher. The teacher who was there, I think she had a heart attack, if I'm remembering correctly. It was a long time ago. But I filled in for a couple months, and I loved it. And I remembered that the only names I remember from that class was that I had 2 Victors. And Victor Ross was and so now he comes to my turf. I'm going to start out with a little story that may sound disconnected. My husband and I owned Volkswagen Jettas for several years, always just second-hand Volkswagen Jettas, and we liked them for several reasons. We had a great mechanic who worked only on Volkswagens and had lots of used parts, and and he wasn't too expensive, but Volkswagens were pretty dependable, and they were diesel, and I really liked that too. So my husband used to tell me all the time, because I drove the car most of the time and he drove his truck. Once in a while he used to say, "Don't forget, never put gasoline in that engine." And I never did. I always put diesel in it. But one day my husband and I were up in Moncton visiting one of our sons and his family. He was driving, and on the way home we stopped in Amherst to fuel up. And we got back on the highway. We only got about 1 kilometer, and the car just started having convulsions, and we coasted onto the shoulder, and I said, "You didn't put gasoline in that engine, did you?" Well, he did. And so we had to be towed back to Amherst and have the gasoline siphoned out and replace it with diesel fuel. Fortunately, it didn't ruin the motor. But I love that happened, because it's such an incredible illustration. You know, in that glove compartment, and probably in the glove compartment of every vehicle that you own, is an owner's manual. And that owner's manual is written by the manufacturer. And the manufacturer tells you how much air pressure you should have in your tires, and how often you should change the oil, and what kind of fuel to put in the engine, because the manufacturer made it. And he knows how that car operates properly. We have an owner's manual.
Amen.
And he has only our best interests at heart. He wants us to operate to the full, to have abundant life. And so when he gives us commands, the Bible says that his commandments are not grievous, because they're always for our good and only out of love. Anything that we do that, so you see, I could drive into a service station when I have those Jettas, and I could say, well, you know what, right now, gasoline is cheaper than diesel, and everybody else is putting diesel in their engines, so why not me? And then I would suffer the consequences, wouldn't I? And that's what happens when we don't pay attention to the manufacturer's instructions. When we've made up our own mind about what we think is good based on our own desires, and that's called sin.
Amen.
That's called sin. Did you know that the word sin is also an archery term? Maxine, can I have the first picture, please? So this is an archery target. And you know, the bullseye is the yellow in the middle, and you notice that none of the arrows have hit the bullseye. And that is called, in archery terms, it's often called a sin. That when you miss the bullseye, you have sinned. Maxine, show me the next one, please. This one is completely missed the whole target, hasn't it? So the first one, you missed the bullseye, you know, by a little bit. This one, you've missed the bullseye by a lot. But whether you sinned by a little or you sinned by a lot, you sinned. And it's interesting that the children's story this morning was just that. Yeah. So the fact remains, we're all sinners. So I want to read you a story from the book of Acts. And I believe it's going to be on the screen as well. Acts chapter 10. At Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion, who was known as the Italian regiment. And so because he was a centurion and from the Italian regiment, that means that he was a Gentile. He was a Roman, he was a Gentile. And even during Jesus' ministry, in spite of the fact that Jesus sometimes ministered to Gentiles, even his disciples didn't quite get it then, that God's grace was for everyone, that he was not just for the Jews. So I'm going to go on, verse 2. He and all his family were devout and God-fearing. He gave generously to those in need and prayed to God regularly. One day at about 3 p.m, he had a vision. He distinctly saw an angel of God who came to him and said, "Cornelius." Cornelius stared at him in fear. "What is it, Lord?" he asked. The angel answered, "Your prayers and gifts to the poor have come up as a memorial offering before God. Now send men to Joppa to bring back a man named Simon, who is called Peter. He is staying with Simon the tanner, whose house is by the sea." When the angel who spoke to him had gone, Cornelius called 2 of his servants and a devout soldier who were one of his attendants. He told them everything that had happened and sent them to Joppa. About noon the following day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. And just remember, the roof was not like this, because that would be a very awkward place to go to pray. It would be a flat roof with a little barricade around it. He became hungry and wanted something to eat, and while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw heaven opened and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its 4 corners. It contained all kinds of 4-footed animals, as well as reptiles of the earth and birds of the air. Then a voice told him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." "Surely not, Lord," Peter replied. "I have never eaten anything impure or unclean." The voice spoke to him a second time, "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean." This happened 3 times, and immediately the sheet was taken back to heaven. We're all unclean in our sin. But God makes us clean. We can't call someone who missed the mark by a lot more unclean than we are, because a sin is a sin is a sin. I want to tell you about one of our former inmates, Loretta, and most of our prison ministry team will remember Loretta. She's about this tall, just this crusty, tough little nut, Loretta. And when I was teaching school at the prison, she was one of my students, and yes, Loretta was tough. She was crusty. But the last time that Loretta came to prison, probably about, I would say about 2 years ago, Loretta had been coming sometimes to chapel, not very often to Bible study, but she started doing some of the correspondence Bible studies that we have, and we're so blessed. We have 5 organizations that send in correspondence Bible studies, and the women love to do them. Well, Loretta one day just all of a sudden appeared in the doorway of my office, and she said, "Guess what, Judy? I think I've had an epiphany." And I said, "What's that, Loretta?" And she said, "I think I'm a Christian." And I said, "I think so too." And because I had begun to see changes in Loretta, and from then on, she always came to chapel, she always came to Bible study. And when Loretta was getting close to coming out, she became very anxious. She didn't have a place to go. She was getting out on what we call her stat release, her statutory release. She wasn't going to be going to a halfway house. She had no place to go, and she said, "I'm just going to end up on the street again using drugs." Well, the background of Loretta is that when she was 10 years old, her father kicked her out of home. And for most of the next 45 years, she lived on the street. And her addictions to drugs and alcohol began when she was 10 years old. And it was just a cycle for her. She, over that period of time, she spent 15 years in prisons. And so she was so afraid, even though she'd come to know the Lord, that it would all fall apart when she got out. And I said, "No, God's got a way for you." And so we found out about a Christian rehab in Shediac, New Brunswick. It's called Naomi and Ruth Center. And Loretta decided to go there. Within 6 months, Loretta was going to reach her WED, which is her warrant expiry date. And that means that it's all over. The sentence is done. The program, though, went for 9 months, and Loretta decided, in spite of the fact that my warrant expires in 6 months, I'm going to stay for the whole 9-month program. She stayed, and she did so well that they hired her full-time on staff. And it's just such an incredible story. She lives there, so she has a home, she has a job, she has a ministry. She is helping other women with addictions. She is a little fireball for the Lord now. Last Sunday, I brought her down to Truro, and she spoke in my church along with me. Not a fear in the world, and it was just so incredible. Some of our women who have known her for years said, "Loretta? Really? You're talking about Loretta?" I do remember, too, that after Loretta came to the Lord, she sat in my office one day and we talked about forgiveness. Forgiveness is such a huge, huge issue. Unforgiveness is such a barrier to having God in His fullness. And Loretta said, "I've forgiven my mother, but I will never forgive my father. I hate my father. I will never forgive him." While she was at the rehab center, though, they asked, all of the women were asked to write a letter of forgiveness to someone. So she wrote a letter of forgiveness to her father, but she said, "I wasn't feeling it." She wrote the letter, but she wasn't really feeling it. And a short time after that, she got word that her father was in the hospital dying. She went to the hospital to be with her father. She held his hand, and she prayed for him. She forgave him. And she said just this peace came over him. And the next week she was baptized. So she is just one story of many. Prison is a great place to go if you need the Lord. Right, Mark? For many, many people, and I've heard this in male institutions as well as our female institutions, I was glad I came to prison because this is where I found the Lord. Prison stops you dead in your tracks. And for many women, that's a wake-up call. I cannot do this any longer. I need to do something different. I need God. They're so much more open to God in those circumstances than they often are before. Yesterday, we just are finishing up an Alpha course in prison, and I had 4 of the women ask me to baptize them. And so one of them is getting out this week. So this Sunday, this is what Brenda was referring to. The team that comes today is going to be able to take part in the baptism of one of our women. This is the cream of the crop, you know? I turned 65 and all my friends were retiring, and God gave me the desire of my heart. Amen. This wonderful ministry.
Amen. Thank you, Lord.
I want to read you one more verse, and this is one I often use with the women when they talk about their past and, you know, how could they ever go on from here. It's from the book of Joel in the Old Testament. God is saying, "I will repay you or restore to you the years that the locusts have eaten. The great locust and the young locust, the other locusts and the locust swarm. I will restore to you the years that the locusts have eaten." And that verse always stood out to me because my mother grew up in Saskatchewan during the Great Depression. And her father was a wheat farmer. So not only had they just gone through the First World War and the economy was very depressed, but in the Midwest there was a great drought. And that just multiplied the difficulties, and particularly if you were a wheat farmer. And she talks about the clouds of grasshoppers coming over and eating everything that was on the ground. And if you think about our past, our sinful past, those days, those weeks, those months, or maybe even years that you just want to, take those pages out of your life and throw them away. God doesn't say, throw away the sinful years and just give me the good stuff and I'll work with it. He asks us to give him everything, the whole bundle. And he says, I will restore to you those years that the locusts have eaten. And I think about Loretta, and I think about how God has taken that broken past, and she's now ministering to people with addictions, with people who have suffered abuse and homelessness and have had cause for unforgiveness in their hearts. And God is using that past now and restoring it. And I'm just so grateful for that. Thank you. This church not only sends a team, but I know that you support us in many other ways, and just bless you for that. Thank you.